Hello and welcome to the 7th episode of the Raceday Rewind, our Raceday review. My name is Joe. You can follow me along at JoeJess19 on Twitter and also on the youtube.com/Raceday review site, and then I also am streaming currently on twitch.tv/JoeJess19. I am the NASCAR writer for LineStar, a leading DFS analytics company, and we're going to be going over the first Data 500 from Martinsville racetrack. It was an absolute and complete beatdown by Martin Truex Jr. We'll go over that in a couple of minutes. There are a lot of different ways that this could have played out. We were really looking for, with same day tech, we were really looking at the value that it opened up. And let's jump right in. So, as always, we start, what were we looking to target at the going into the race? And the last 5 or 6 races here have seen at least two drivers dominate. Sorry about that. I've seen at least 2 drivers dominate, and most of the dominators have come from the top 10. Every one of them except for one in the last 6 races started in the top 10, and then one person who didn't was Kyle Busch. I think he started 14th. The last race here was the complete and utter domination by Keselowski. He started 3rd and pushed his own teammate out of the way and ended up never turning back. And what we learned from that race was that if you got the clean air up front, it was going to be very hard to pass. It's not terribly hard to pass if you started in the back and you need to make your way up front, but I heard they said a couple of times on the broadcast that once you got into the top 10, it really slowed down. You're stuck behind a car, and everyone was blaming the spoilers. It just sucked the air right out of them. So once you got to good cars, it got much more difficult to pass than if you were in the back going forward, which was a key thing for us to look at when I write my article and start doing a lot of the research, I look into a lot of the previous perfect lineups had 2 drivers starting in the top 30 and the bottom 30. It's not normally. Every now and then you'll get like a real scrub starting there that ends up just surviving the race and picks up a couple of spots, and that's how they end up making it in the perfect lineup. And because we usually focus on top 10 drivers for our dominators and high price drivers for our dominators, that it makes sense for the builds, but also because this is a same day tech race, and if anyone failed, they would go to they'd have their qualifying time disallowed. It had the potential to open up some value from drivers starting in 30th or worse. And this race on Sunday, actually, that did happen. You had Ryan Newman fail, Timmy Hill fail, LaJoy, and I can tell you exactly. Give me 1 second. So the guys who failed, Brendan McLeod. And then you also had Chase Elliott for some reason. I never get it. And a little bit of a tangent here. I try to avoid these because then I'll be talking for way too long. But guys who know that they're going in the back, especially at races like these that are going to lose their qualifying position anyway, why do they qualify well? Elliott knew he would change his engine after the first practice, so he knew no matter what happened, he was going to end up having to drop to the rear, at least get scored from the rear. I know sponsorship monies, you gotta try your best, yada yada yada, this, that, the other thing. It infuriates me every time because Elliott qualified second, had to drop to the rear because then he even qualify second, and then kick in a bumper or something and fail tech, and then you can say, well, at least I qualified well, and then it was tech that got me. And maybe I don't know how that's going to end up working with sponsorship monies and all that other fun stuff, but do something to help yourself out. You're starting back there anywhere, at least get scored from back there. You don't get anything from qualifying second. But that was a tangent all by myself. So you had four guys who did fail tech, so they were starting 35th, 36th, 37th, 38th, and then I think actually starting, they ended up starting in the same spot, but they had Chase Elliott in front of them. So there was really a tangent entirely, put me completely off track. But what we're looking for is we wanted dominators. We focused on dominators first. And I was thinking at least 2, maybe 3 drivers starting in the top 10 to dominate and stay up there. There have been some dominators that led more than 100 laps that ended up falling and then not being in the perfect lineup, but I would rather take my chance on that happening than just steer away from guys out of the top 10. So this week was going to be a very top 10 heavy lineup for dominators. And then the way to balance it out is you need cheap guys normally starting in the rear. We lucked out, and Corey LaJoie, who had a fairly decent car for the price range, ended up at starting 36th instead of 27th. At 27th, he thought he started a little too far forward, and he brought a lot more downside than I would have liked. But he was an absolute gift, failing inspection. Newman wasn't really on my radar. He also started in the low 20s, but in the high 20s, I believe, but failed tech. So then he went from a 15 to 20% driver to I had him in 80% of my lineups, because even if he spun out, sure, he would have lost a couple of points, but his floor was so good and his upside, he ended up having an upside type race. So that was awesome. And then depending on how tech shaped up, I actually played 3 drivers because my third driver would be Ty Dillon, and even Online Star. I write the articles on Saturday, but I hate when we have to upload them before tech is complete, but people have to do their research beforehand, so I totally do understand, and that's why chat is a very important option. A lot of places have Discord, Line Star, if you ever want to check them out, they have chat actually embedded in their website and their app, so you don't have to go to a website and then go to a Discord app and have 2 different things open. Everything's right there for you. You can do it all in the same spot. And the day of the race, I normally update people. And the first thing I said once everything shook out was I still love Ty Dillon because all of the guys who failed behind him, so he didn't actually move up in the field at all. But then Newman and LaJoie were another combination. Those 3 drivers, if you just hit the lock button on all of them, you ended up with $10,000 of salary for the other half of your team, and you could have done a lot. There were a lot of different pieces tinkering to do. You wouldn't have hit the optimal lineup because Ty Dillon was not in the optimal lineup. We'll go over that. But you could have taken down the first gear, which was $20,000, so it's not the worst thing in the world. The optimal lineup didn't hit in either one of the big tournaments, and the first gear was a 3-way tie. The Chrome Horn, the guy who won it solo, but a Ty Dillon lineup could have made you there, and that's a great place to start. He was a little more risky than I would have liked, but so that's how I ended up looking at the slate. Let's go over the perfect lineup, see how going into the race, that's how I wanted to look at it. That's how I was really looking to attack it, and let's see how that would have shaped out. Well, Hamlin started on the pole. I mentioned in the preview episode of the preview part of last episode that we normally want a driver starting on the pole. There's something magical about the clean air, and for the most part, Hamlin did that. I say that facetiously, kind of, because he only led for 30 laps, but that's because his pit crew sucked. He lost the lead on a change on a tire, and on the first caution, the first run of pit stops, and he was never able to get it back. I don't know exactly what happened. He and Truex both took 4 tires. Truex got out about 2 seconds faster than him, which was an absolutely abysmal. So the biggest lead change of this entire race happened, and it happened on pit road, which is tough when you had 470 more laps to go after that. Truex just had a monster of a car. Overall, not really. I had a hard time piecing together which one I liked between these two. I wanted a driver in the top three. So my options were, I wrote up Chase Elliott as starting in the top three because he was technically starting second, but he would have been a dark horse dominator. Not the smartest move. He didn't really do much. But so my top three that I really should have broken down were Hamlin, Elliott, and Hamlin, Truex, and Almirola. Hamlin. Let's go to the model where I have all that fun stuff. Let's go. Let's just make it easy and put it in starting position. So Hamlin was a little bit less expensive than Truex. He had a worse average finish at Martinsville, a worse place differential at Martinsville, but a worse average finishing position. So Hamlin being on the pole didn't really make me feel that great, but he did lead laps in the past, and he can lead laps here, and that's something. And I figured, between the fact that he knows how to lead laps at Martinsville and he's kind of risk averse, as well as the fact that he would be getting the preferred lane on the restarts, and his preferred lane was to stay on the inside. So because Chase Elliott had to fall back, and Hamlin had the choice of which lane. He had the choice of either starting on the outside and letting Truex pop up into the second position on the front row with him, or he could start on the inside where Truex was locked into and let Almirola slide up. And he chose to box in Truex, which was a great move because Hamlin had like a second and a half lead by the time that the caution came out. So he really, that was a great way to play, and that's what I was expecting to happen. I figured it would happen for 80 to 90 laps before something terrible happened. That didn't work out for me. Well, it did work out because Hamlin still managed to be in the perfect lineup and every winning lineup. But if it was a 60-40 split where Hamlin led 120 laps and Truex led 240 laps, and there was another driver and a couple of drivers just like kind of picked up the rest of them like most of the other races happened, I would have had a much better day. Hamlin was incredibly high owned, about 55 to 60%, so I was lower than the field because I had him about 45 to 50%. And I was actually a little bit higher on the field of Truex because I had him about 30, and the field was about 20 to 25, depending on what tournament you played. It really wasn't a great difference. Their single lap speeds were comparable. They were within a couple of tenths of a second. Their weighted single lap. Their 10 lap averages were pretty close. Hamlin had a better 25 lap average, but Truex had a better 15 and 20. At that point, you're really splitting hairs, but the difference was on the very long run, and that's why I gave Hamlin the edge, basically because of that, because there were a lot of green flags laps run, and Hamlin had a 0.2 second difference between he was slower than Truex on the 20 lap average, but he was faster than Truex on the 25 lap average by 0.2 seconds. So once you got into the real long runs, and when you're really going to see, that's where I thought Hamlin would be able to push it and really be able to break out, which he would have if his crew didn't absolutely demoralize him. But so they were that close. That's the difference between Hamlin and Truex Jr. My model had my projected model had Truex finishing second and Hamlin finishing fourth, which actually hit pretty close. Model's not great. I had their best, the ceiling of first and second for them, and so they had around the same floor. I thought Hamlin had a better chance of leading laps, especially from where he was started. And I was explaining to my wife while we were watching the while we were watching the last 50 laps, because this race really picked up in the last 50 laps. A couple of cautions came out, and she was just like, it's pit stops, why would you want to watch it? And I said, because every pass for the lead has happened on pit road today. It happened when Larson stayed out. It happened when Truex passed Denny on the first pit stop. It happened when Larson stayed out at the end of stage 2 to win the stage, and then happened again when Truex just resumed the lead after the pit stop shuffled out at the end of stage 2. So it really, the most exciting part were the pit stops, and that's why I was watching them the last 50 laps very intently. The rest of the race, we kind of guys going around in circles, a couple cut tires, things like that. So Hamlin and Truex, I wanted to build around Hamlin. I thought that a great combination would be a Hamlin and Keselowski. I know Keselowski was fairly not as popular as I thought he was going to be, but considering his price, which was only $9,500, and his starting position, which was 15th, I thought he had a chance if he ran a top 5 to finish in the top 5, as long as he led some laps. He didn't even have to be the main dominator, but if he led a handful of laps with some fastest laps, he'd be able to pay off his salary and sneak in the perfect lineup. He finished 3rd, which was great, but it just wasn't enough. Make sure I got my math right. Yeah, he finished 3rd, which was great, but he didn't lead any laps, so he didn't score enough points to get there. But I thought a Hamlin Keselowski lineup was a very good option. I know Keselowski wasn't starting in the top 10, so it didn't meet my criteria, but I thought that he was an option. Another option was a Hamlin Bowyer team, or a Hamlin, or even a Bowyer, if you really want to get crazy, a Bowyer Keselowski team, and then you had a lot of ways you could have attacked it if you only wanted one of the back markers, 2 of the back markers instead of all 3. If you just wanted LaJoy and you just wanted Newman to play safe and you didn't want Ty Dillon in there, you could go with like a Bowyer and a Keselowski lineup to differentiate yourself. They had a lot of upside. Bowyer cut his tire late and he ended up blowing out, so that didn't work out well. But he had a lot of promise. Let's just see what we were looking at. He was starting 7th. His average finish in the last 5 races was 7.8, but he normally loses. So normally he starts 7th and finishes 8th. His average running position was about 8th. His similar finishes weren't great, and that's mostly because of damage and things like that. His single lap speed was 8th, the weighted single lap, but his weighted 10 lap average, he had the best 10, 15, and 20 in both practices, and the best 25 in second practice. So he had a lot of speed in his car, and at 8,900, he's another guy who didn't have to, as long as he won the race, he would probably be in the perfect lineup. He just had to have enough speed to stay in the top 5 most of the time. I wanted to check out his average running position. His average running position was actually 15th, so not great considering his 7th place starting position. Sorry, the baby monitor just kicked off and my tablet died. That sucks. But if it wasn't for the blown tire, he really did have a good chance to at least pay off his salary, or at least be a nice cash play. He fit my criteria of starting in the top 10. The guys who I loved in the top 10 were Hamlin. Hamlin was my 1. Truex was my 2. And then Bowyer was my 3. I didn't really I had some Logano. Suarez I didn't think had a chance. Eric Jones I didn't think had a chance. I'm tired of playing Eric Jones, especially when he was actually running up top for a good bit of the race, but I can't do it. He's done it enough to me. He's burned me too many times. Blaney finished much better than I expected. He picked up some fastest laps. So good for him. He was not on my radar. He only had his average finishing position at Martinsville was 12th, and he usually does this a lot. He qualifies well and loses about 5 spots. His average running position was 10th. Even his similar finish was only 14th, so I didn't. His car, he had a great car on a single laps and a decent car on the 10-lap average, but if he was starting 20th, he would have been a lock and load play. He was not starting 20th, he was starting 6th. So I couldn't. He wasn't on my radar. It ended up he didn't make the perfect lineup, but I thought he made a winning lineup. Oh, he didn't make that either. So no, good reason to fade him entirely. Suarez, no real things. Byron was an interesting one. I didn't like Byron starting 11th. I didn't think he was going to. It's at the end of the race. He was the only car to give Truex any really reason to sweat. DiBenedetto started too well, qualified too well, so I cut him out entirely. Then I started sprinkling in some Kyle Busch. I like Kyle Busch this weekend just because whenever he's here, he's always got to be someone who might lead 100 laps. He led 100 laps in 3 of the last 5 races, of course, always coming from, most of the time coming from the top 10. He did have that one time finishing, starting 14th there, he led 100 laps. So I was hoping kind of for a repeat of that. In cash, he was a decent enough play if you just wanted Hamlin. He had a very good chance. So his 2.4 is his average finishing position, with a lot of moving up, so that's impressive. His single lap time wasn't great. His 10-lap average was better. So he had a decent chance of leading laps, even though he started 13th. The reason I wrote Kevin Harvick up as my fade, and the big difference is a lot of people looked at Harvick. He had a big price discount. He was $1,300 cheaper, and he was starting 10 spots back, just about, because he was starting 22nd. He was starting 22nd, so he started 9 spots back. So he had more place differential potential, which you would think would have a higher floor. But anyone over the 9,000 range starting here needs to have the ability to lead laps, and I didn't think he had any chance to lead laps. His average finishing position was 9.2 as opposed to 2.4 for Kyle Busch. Even at similar tracks, he actually was better. Was better at similar tracks than Busch. But again, I faded him because I didn't think he had any chance to lead laps, and for 10,000, even if he finished second, there was no way he was going to be in the perfect lineup. He still put up a nice score. He had a good day for himself. Yada yada yada. This, that, the other thing. He was complaining the entire time once he got to the top 15 that he couldn't pass anyone. There was just not a lot. If I was going to spend up for another driver, I was going to find a way to get to Kyle Busch. Larson, I didn't like at all. He does not run well at Martinsville. He doesn't do anything well at Martinsville. I projected him as a finish of 16th. He finished 9th. Higher than his ceiling. I had him as a ceiling of 13 and a floor of 31. Starting 14th, that's not what you want to say. Keselowski, I really liked. We went over him. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. started too high with an average finish of 2.2. He didn't 20.2. He didn't practice well. There was nothing for him for me. He actually finished 15th, which is good for him. Reagan was surprising. I had him in a couple. I projected him as 29th and in like a high risk lineup. My highly risk lineup, I went Chase Elliott, Brad Keselowski, and Reagan. So that thing finished last. But in another world, that could have done some damage. I've run depending on how many lineups you run. Yes, if I play that in cash, I probably should hang myself. But I didn't. It was a tournament type lineup. I put it in the octuple up, and I decided if it hits, it hits. If it doesn't hit, it doesn't hit. Every now and then you'll get one of those, and it'll work pretty well for you. I did it a couple of months ago with a satellite to the $15 qualifier for the Fantasy Racing World Championship, and it hit, which worked out well. But then I burned the ticket anyway. But that was a different story. No, it hit. I ended up in 15th place. So the $15 ticket, I was actually in the qualifier itself. I think if I hit like 9th or 10th place, and I won $30 on my 10-cent ticket because I won a ticket to get in there, and that ticket went somewhere else. But yeah, those types of lineups do hit every now and then. Maybe not as crazy as if Chase Elliott actually started second, that would have been a great option. But being scored from second and starting last, he had way too much risk. But the same lineup had Rosser, David Reagan starting 17th. So there was more than one risk going on there. Hemrick surprised me. He only has a one race here in the Cup. He gained one spot. His similar finishing was 23rd though. So these are all this year races, so that wasn't really great. He had a surprising single lap average, not great in the 10-lap average, and with a lot of laps being run consecutively. That's what I really try to focus on here. Bowman, I had projected to finish 14th, so I would have liked to have seen him do a little better. He ended up he got into trouble with one of the other guys, ended up having a problem, and they swept him up with it. Buescher was in a salary range that I liked. He was less expensive than Paul Menard. Again, Menard was supposed to sop up all of the ownership. I wasn't a big fan of Menard. I would have, as a leverage play, I kind of liked Buescher more, but that was more of a leverage play than everything because he didn't have great practice speeds, doesn't have a great history here. He started 20th, he finished 12th, so that worked out to an extent. He finished right around that where I predicted to have a ceiling of. Not a high ownership play, but someone who could make a difference if he did well. Hopefully my son doesn't wake up, which it looks like he is. So I'll put this a little quicker. Austin Dillon was a driver I absolutely loved starting. He was starting 23rd, and he had an average finishing position of 17th. In my article, I called him the inferior Dillon brother, which I'm sure if anyone actually cared would have been funny to most people. Most racing people, I guess. I had a projection finishing 22nd, which he actually did finish, even though I thought he had a top 20 in him. I played more Ty Dillon than Austin Dillon, but I thought they both had a shot. I really liked Jimmy Johnson, whose salary is not $5,100. JJ Ellie's salary is $5,100, but at $8,000, I really liked Jimmy Johnson. He was caught up, I believe, in the pissing contest between Almirola and Kurt Busch. I think Kyle Busch. I think Almirola and Kyle Busch ended up taking out both Bowman and Jimmy Johnson tangentially, which wasn't great for me because I love me some Jimmy Johnson. I thought he was going to have himself a great day, and that didn't work out nearly as well. Kurt Busch was my original fade candidate over Harvick. His average finishing position here was 17.6, starting 25th. That was an upgrade, but at 8,500, that's a lot of money. He was better at similar tracks this year, but his practice speeds, which were very impressive, really took me off the ledge. I was worried about him entirely. I was worried about him, but he actually did pretty well. He finished 6th, which was better. Before qualifying happened, I knew I was going to need two guys in the starting 30th or worse. I talked myself into Ty Dillon and actually Garrett Smithley. Why Garrett Smithley? I'll tell you. It's because he was the cheapest driver. He was starting dead last, and he actually was the only driver who practiced better than he qualified. in that price range. And when I'm looking at this year, the DraftKings has gotten so good at pricing out, or at least so tough at pricing out. It's been kind of brutal. It used to get one punt, and if you punted one guy, you could get 2 studs. You can't do that anymore, and the punt's got to really be a punt. It depends on how you want to play. If you want to go for wins all the time and you want to just try to aim to take down a tournament, you can't do that. If you're worried about min cashing, you can do it. There are ways for you to make money in NASCAR with a lot of different strategies. When I was building my bankroll, I would take the 2 favorites, the 2 guys that I thought were going to be able to lead the most laps. At that point, it was Kevin Harvick, because it was like 3 or 4 years ago when Harvick was winning everything. I could play like Kevin Harvick and Kyle Busch, 2 guys that could lead laps. I would start the guy 38th and 39th and kind of fill it in between, and min cashed my way until you got better and you review everything and you look at what you're doing, and then you can see what's at. Then you start multi-entering, and then you start doing with ownership and all that other fun stuff. So if you're just a single lineup guy, someone just starting out, there is a way for you to make money in NASCAR. You have to pick the right driver, but meaning that you can't pick the driver that the $11,000 driver that doesn't lead any laps, because then you're fucked. But if you get the Dominator right, or at least take 2 stabs at the Dominator, and one of them's right, one of them's wrong, but at least you got that, and you have enough money to make a decent enough lineup that you'll pick up some spots, you usually can cash in NASCAR, especially earlier on in the year when the payouts are a little better. There's a lot of these tournaments, you got to hit the top 23 to 22, 23, 24% to either 1.5 or double your money, and then to triple your money, you have to hit like the top 7%. And there's a massive jump, and to make some good money in NASCAR, especially, I play almost entirely tournaments. I'll do a double up. I'll do couple of tournament lineups in a double up and then triple up. Then I'll do a double up and a quintuple up and a double up and octuple up. So I'll have 3 lineups that I hand build to just mostly gauge where the cash line is and see how much, like the octuple ups and literally the octuple up and the quintuple up both cashed at lower than the $4 and the $11 paid to triple your money. So a $1 lineup in the octuple up could have cashed in the octuple up and made you $8, where $11 would only have made you $18. Same exact lineup. It's just the contest selection. That's why I always like to keep an eye on these things. And then if I get a lineup, and then I always enter those in a tournament too, just to see, because you never know. It's fun and all winning a double up, and it's fun and all taking down an octuple up and scoring first. But if you don't play it in an actual tournament where you can make a lot of money, then you're just kicking yourself in the ass for the next 6 months. But again, a lot of tangents today. I apologize. But so I went with Smithley because when I'm looking at these types of drivers, and I know I need a driver under 5,500, under 6,000, you'll normally get 1 or 2 guys that qualify way too well, and you write them off entirely. David Riggin. And then normally Hemrick, in most cases, he'll start in the top 10, and he's just not worth the $5,700 salary. And then you'll get guys who are 4,700 that are starting absolutely last. And even if he practiced 32nd and he's starting 38th, at least that's better. All these other drivers who were starting 33rd were practicing 35th. They had the 36th best 10-lap average. Like, it was a mess. So if you're going to punt, you might as well go the entire way because he couldn't have lost you any points. So that's where I was looking at. It's not really, I'm not going with glowing praise. I'm not saying he's going to win you a tournament. I'm going to say if your lineup construction needs one guy to punt, you might as well punt this guy. He actually turned out pretty well. He, all things considered, finishing 37th isn't terrible for him. The play in this range was obviously LaJoy. When he was starting 28th, I had him projected to finish 30th, which wasn't great. His average finish was 28th. His high was 19th, which didn't work out well because he actually finished 18th. This is a little off. I apologize. Either way, he was my go-to once qualifying shook out. And as I like Ty Dillon, his average finish here was 20th. His average why I never actually went over why. He had great single lap times. His 10-lap average wasn't the best, but with all of the ownership going to Menard, who was starting one spot behind him at $900 more, I thought that Ty Dillon would be the better play. He didn't have as good of an average finishing position at similar tracks or here, but he had a better car, and I thought that the car would overtake that, and see how that worked out. So I don't want to do the driver by driver, but that's why I knew Newman was going to be there. I knew Byron was going to be there. I skipped over Newman entirely. I apologize. Let's go over Newman real quick. Newman, $7,500. His average finishing position was 14.4. His average finishing similar was 13.3. So he had his practice times were scary. At 27th, he was a play. I still like Ty Dillon more than Newman, even just because of the price difference and starting behind him. That wasn't the right finishing position. He finished 10th. Let me just go to this so you can. So Newman finished 10th. Smithley finished 32nd. If you started 38th, that wouldn't have been nearly as bad. LaJoy finished 18th, which I liked. Dillon only finished 21st. Ty Dillon finished 24th. So actually, Menard ended up doing a little bit better than Ty Dillon. With the ownership, Ty Dillon was actually running better. He ended up spinning out at one point and causing a caution. So he had a much better chance than what really showed up. Bubba Wallace, I was not on at all. I didn't like Bubba Wallace, especially at a track that bad things can happen. He didn't finish well here in the past. He didn't finish well at similar tracks. He didn't practice well here. A lot of people were on him, and good for them. Sometimes you miss him. Bubba Wallace is kind of like Eric Jones for me, that he's burned me enough. I would rather take my chance on Wallace when he's got a good car and he's racing well than at a high incidence track with bad practice times. There are spots to play him. There are always spots to play him. There's always a reason to click on the Bubba Wallace button. I opted for Ty Dillon, starting in the same exact range with a better car and a better history. So Wallace ended up being a good pivot off of Dillon. Not really thinking you needed a pivot off of Dillon, because Dillon was my pivot off of Menard. But that's sometimes how it works out. Wallace was not on my radar. Wallace and Byron were the two guys that I couldn't put my finger on. Even looking into their practice times and things like that, there really wasn't much to tell me that they were going to do great. The differences between the perfect lineup and the lineup that took the first gear down, is they played Ty Dillon instead of Bubba Wallace. The rest of the lineup was the same. For the 40, the Chrome Horn, it was Byron Hamlin. They played Hemrick instead of Wallace, and the rest of the things was the same. So this was the range that won people the money. And going into the race, I wanted LaJoy, I wanted Newman, and I actually wanted Ty Dillon, and then I would have Hamlin, and then I kind of fiddle around with the rest of them. I had a couple there are a couple of different ways you go on it. I like Keselowski, so I had like a Hamlin Keselowski combination. I had a Truex Keselowski combination. I had Truex Boyer. I had a lot of Boyer, just because of I thought he would check the box of starting in the top 10 and having a very fast car over the long runs. So you could actually get Hamlin, Boyer, and Keselowski in a lineup with the other three, and I ran that lineup out there. So there are a couple of different ways you could have gone, and this is one of those races where as I saw one person put it, the inspection gods did right by us, and it worked out. The guys who failed, two of the guys who failed, ended up in the perfect lineup. It's made cash a little bit easier. Some people still tried to fade it. The fact that Newman was only about 40% owned, yes, his practice times were terrible, so that was nice, but just you have to trust the process a little bit. Me and Joel Embiid. So that pretty much not wrecked about everyone. We right through everyone just about for the playoffs. Truex locked his position in. We have 2 mile-and-a-halves coming up, which is Truex normally does well. Phoenix is a mile and a half. You get a 1 mile Phoenix and a mile and a half at Texas. But Phoenix is always Kevin Harvick's last stand. He does something different at Phoenix every time. It hasn't worked out for him in the last 2, I believe. We'll go over that next week. But so right now, Truex punched his ticket to Homestead. Kyle Busch is going to be interesting because Eric Almirola is going to be gunning for him. Why he wanted to take that smoke, I don't know. But no one's really safe right now with only one. No, I mean Truex is safe. No one else is safe with 2 more races to go before Homestead. The only one really in absolute jeopardy is Chase Elliott. He's going to be trying to hit a home run the next 2 races because he's going to have a hard time making up points. Blaney's still over his head. No idea how he's still in there. I do know how he's still in there. He won a race last round of the playoffs, but you get the point. He'll fade out. So it's going to be an interesting. I think the 3 drivers right now that are in even the 4 drivers. I think Truex and Hamlin are the only 2 that are incredibly safe. I think Blaney and Elliott are the only 2 that are screwed, and then the other 4 are kind of fighting for 2 spots. I could see where Kyle Busch gets Almirola gets even with Kyle Busch, not once, maybe twice. So he might save it for Phoenix, just mess with him the entire time. Just if Kyle Busch doesn't win next race, every time he's got to be around Almirola, he's got to look out. That would be a hell of a story. Logano is just always one of those drivers who's there. Usually when he does well, he gets hot in the playoffs. He hasn't really gotten too hot. I think Harvick should be okay. I think Harvick's going to end up sneaking by. He's 14 points back, but that's not the worst thing in the world. He can make that up. And Larson he's 24 points back, so that's okay. A quick look at Texas, because now my son really is awake and I have to get going. Really weird race here in March. No one really led a ton. I had the lap leaders all written down anywhere. I don't know where they are. Anyway, so you had 2 guys leading 60, 2 guys leading 45, and a guy who led 30. It was typed out somewhere. I don't know where it ended up going, but I apologize. It should be there. 4 drivers in the top 6 ended up in the perfect lineup, which is not normal, and 5 drivers in the top 11. That's insane. I hope that doesn't happen again. A more traditional way of going about things is 3 drivers in the top 10, 3 guys leading 100 laps, or at least 80 or more laps. Let's just filter through. There are a couple of 1 dominators, but usually about 2 dominators you see here. Someone starting in the top 2. Look for a dominator, and then Yeah, almost every time you have a dominator starting in the top 2, another dominator in the top 10. I'll look for probably a 2 dominator race, maybe a 3 dominator race, and then see what happens from there. It's a mile and a half. There should be a lot of passing. There should be a decent amount of drafting. So this is the type of race that that the package was made for. But let's see how it shakes out. All in all, thank you very much. I ran a little long this week. I wasn't expecting that to happen. Thanks for joining us. If you have any questions, comments, tips, anything like that, please reach out to me on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. I'm Joe, and I will see you next week.